And we're ready to start moving our objects, rotate them, scale them up and down. So to do that, we have a couple of different methods. We'll go over all of them, and then you can use the one that you find most convenient for you, and I'll also share which method I prefer. Now, before we can move our objects, let's understand how this 3D world works. So in this 3D world, you can see we have this red line and then this green line. So this the coordinate system that this 3D world uses has 3 axes, and these axes are represented by these different colors. So if you look in the top right corner of your 3D viewport, we have x-axis, we have y, and z. So x is going to be our left and right, and then y is going to be front and back, and then z is going to be up and down. Our 3D world starts at the origin, which is at the center where all of these lines sort of converge into one place. This is the origin of a 3D world. Now let's go ahead and add a mesh object. So we're going to go ahead and press Shift A and then add a cube object. Now the most basic way of moving our object is by using your tools on our toolbar. So the first tool we have is Move tool. Let's go ahead and activate that, and it's going to display this gizmo or manipulator. And you can see again we have those 3 axes. We have X, Y, and Z. To move our object, we simply left click and hold and drag, and it's going to let us move our object on X, Y, or Z axes. Another very important thing to remember is that you can undo things in Blender. So you can press Ctrl Z and it's going to move a step back, and you can press this couple more times to go a few more steps back. So this is going to be really helpful throughout this course. So this is the most basic way of moving our object. You can move these objects on multiple axes at the same time. So you can see that there are these boxes. These are called planes. You left click and hold on it, and it lets you move your object on 2 axes. So it's like excluding an axis. For example, in this case, we're excluding Z axis, and we're moving our object on the ground very easily. And we can do the same thing here. In this case, we're moving our object along 2 axes, X and Y, Z. No, actually Y and Z. And then if we orbit our view a little bit, here you can see we can move our object on the X and Y, Z axis, just like that. I'll go ahead and press Ctrl Z a couple of times to reset this movement. And then next we have our rotation tool. Again, we have that same gizmo. We can rotate our object on the Y axis. We can do the same thing on the X axis, and finally on the Z axis. And if we click and hold in this middle area, we can freely rotate our object, and this outer white circle is going to rotate with your view. So you can sort of rotate along your view. Again, I'm going to go ahead and press Ctrl Z a couple times to reset the object. Finally, we have our scale tool. Now, scale tool is going to let you scale up. So you simply left click and hold in this area to scale up and down uniformly. And you can also scale along one particular axis. I'm going to go ahead and press Ctrl Z. You can do the same thing here and same thing like that. Again, you have those planes if you want to. But this is really inefficient way of working in Blender. You'd really use these tools, because imagine switching between these different tools like hundreds of times per day. So for example, you move your object, now you need to scale, you go to here, so you'll be wasting a lot of time. So it's highly recommended that you use keyboard shortcuts, because those are really going to help you with that. So we'll go ahead and press N key to open our sidebar, and here you'll notice we have location, rotation, and scale. I'll go ahead and press Ctrl Z so that it resets back. By default, you can see everything starts at 0, 0, 0. So this is our origin of the 3D world, and our object is at current our world origin. So we can tell that by looking at these numbers. Now to move your object, you can use and move this very precisely using these boxes. So you left click and hold and then drag. So this lets you move your object. You can click here and you can type in, for example, 5 meters, and it's moving 5 meters. Now, if you move your object to the positive side of the origin world, so you can see we have this arrow pointing in that direction, it's going to be 5 meters like that. But if you want to go beyond this point of your 3D world, then you type in -5, and it's going to go to the other side of the world origin. And you can do the same thing for all of these different axes. You can also enter values in all of these boxes at the same time by simply left clicking and holding and then dragging over, and then maybe typing in 5. Now, the reason we have these different axes is that it gives you very fine control over the movement of your object. So I'm going to go ahead and press Ctrl Z. So you can see that if we move our object on this x-axis like that, we know that it's about 5 meters on the x-axis, and then we can do the same thing on the y. So it gives us, like, very easily we're able to tell where this object is in 3D space. I'll go ahead and press Ctrl Z. And then we have same thing for a rotation. You can either left click and hold and drag, or you can just left click and then type a very precise value, for example here. And one more thing to keep in mind is that if you want to have more precise control over this value, you can hold down Shift key while you're sort of dragging the value. It's going to give you more finer control over it. Now, the last method that we have is using keyboard shortcuts, and this is my preferred way of working, and this is the most easiest way. Sometimes you might want to use the sidebar because it gives you some like really precise control over your object, but most of the time you'll be using keyboard shortcuts. So let's go and select our selection tool, so we don't need to switch between these tools. Let's select our object, and now to move our object we simply press G. That's going to give us grab tool, and it's going to get attached to our cursor. So just simply press G to grab, and then you can move your cursor. But you can see that it's not very precise, and you don't have control like where do you want to move it. So now you can press X on your keyboard to lock its movement to X-axis. You can press Y, and this is interactive, so I can press X, I can press Y, and Z. So you can see that it gives me very fine control over that. Now, one more problem that we have is that we don't have like really precise control over how much we want to move this. Now you can do this by, for example, I can press G to grab along X-axis, and now I can type in numeric values on my keyboard. So if I press 5 on my numpad, it's going to move my object 5 meters on the X-axis, and then I can press left mouse button to confirm that. And if I right click, for example, G to grab, X, and then 5 meters, but if I right click, it's going to cancel that movement. You can also press escape for canceling. Also notice in the top left corner, as I'm moving my object, it's going to show us a few details. So G to grab, and X-axis. Now you can see that it shows me that I'm moving about 2 meters. So this sort of gives you a good idea to visualize like I want to move my object here, and I can get like a rough idea. So now I'm close to 3.2. Let's type in 3 meters, and just like that, you can see that I have very fine control, and very easily I'm able to move my objects. Now we can do the same thing for rotation. So let's press R to rotate, and it's a freeform rotation, so we can press X-axis, we can press Y or Z, and then we can type in very precise values, so 45 degrees, and then left click to confirm that. And finally, for scaling, we can press S, and that's going to let you scale uniformly, but again, you can press X, Y, or Z, and that's going to let you constrain or lock the movement to that particular axis. So now you can see that we have 3 different methods for moving our objects. We can use tools on our toolbar, we can use the sidebar panel, or we can use the keyboard shortcuts. I personally like to use keyboard shortcuts because that's the most efficient way of working, and don't worry if you don't remember all of the keyboard shortcuts right away. As you work over and over again in Blender, all of this sort of becomes your second nature, and you don't have to think about it. Also, one final thing before we wrap this video up, that if you move your object something like here and you want to quickly sort of move it back to the world origin, you can press Alt-G, so that's going to clear the movement. And if you want to sort of clear the rotation, you can press Alt-R, and that's going to clear the rotation, and same thing for the scaling. So if you have your object scaled, you can press Alt and then S. You can also right click on these values, and here you'll find options like reset all values to default, reset single value to default value, so you can also do that. One final thing, you can see that down here we have scale and dimension. Now scale is usually 1, 1, 1 for all 3 axes, and then dimension tells you the actual dimension of your object. Now if we use the scale value to something like maybe 3, you can see now our object is 3 times as big, so now it's 6 meters. When we started it was 1, so you can see that it was 2 meters. Now what I want you to remember is that in Blender, oftentimes when you're using certain tools, you might get weird results if your scale is uneven. So if your scale is something like here 1 or it's below, so what you want to do is that if you mess around with the scale of your object, then you can press Ctrl A, and that's going to open the apply menu, and you can apply your scale, and it's going to reset that back while giving you or sort of keeping your object modified the way you want it. You can also access the same menu under object menu, and then here under that you'll see we have apply, and then you can apply scale. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's how you'll be able to move your objects. Now you're at a point where you know how to create objects, how to move, rotate, and scale them, and how you can very easily navigate in this 3D space. Now you'll be using all of these things every day in Blender, so I would highly recommend spending some time and practicing so that you get a hang of it, how it works, and so that it sort of becomes your second nature and you don't have to think about it. So that's going to wrap up this video.